gonna be good when I break out that Microsoft Paint. Because Microsoft Paint is literally the best way to sometimes just absolutely explain what's going on with a timeline. I used to do it for the Flash back in the day, and we are most definitely going to be doing it for this. So, Ico comes from the future. So first off, let's do this. This is the Terminator Zero timeline, right? Ico comes from the future. There is a great discussion that occurs in Terminator Zero between both her and the Prophet, where the Prophet basically explains that it's kind of like a arc, right? You exist here. If you send somebody right here to change the timeline, the rest of the arc doesn't disappear. So let's say this arc is timeline A. My name is John, and you send John into the past to 97 to prevent an event from occurring. Instead of this entire timeline changing, which is John changes something in the past, as a direct result, this timeline ceases to be, and it is instead replaced by timeline B. That does not happen. When John gets sent into the past, John creates a Vergence, which creates timeline B. Now, in most media, and I'm actually going to talk about the Flash TV show because the Flash TV show handles this well, especially with the idea of Flashpoint. When a event is changed in the past, the ripples of distortion move up the timeline and shift certain things. But most part, you are on timeline A. So in the Flash TV show, if the Flash goes back into the past and he changes something, there is not another Vergence. That does not occur. This initial change right here makes timeline A transform into timeline A.1. And a Vergence goes up the entire timeline, making waves of distortion that change certain things. Maybe this person's now dead. Maybe this person, in regards to Diggle, it was no longer Sarah Diggle that was born. It was his son, John Diggle Jr., that was born. Cisco's brother dying, things along those lines. But for the most part, you're existing in one timeline in one universe. Terminator does not do that. The way in which Terminator basically explains it is if you go into the past to 97, you create a brand new branch reality in the form of timeline B. But the people on timeline A continue to live on timeline A, which means that you don't save them. You basically just leave that timeline and attempt to stop the next timeline from being an absolute clusterfuck like your timeline. And it's the same thing that will happen again. If a Terminator, while you're in timeline B, sends somebody into the past to change something, a new fork gets created, and timeline C essentially ends up being existing. And so on and so forth with the constant shifting and creating of timelines in this universe. It's one of the reasons why you can have Terminator 1 introduce one timeline, time travel happens, T2 happens, time travel happens, T3 happens, time travel happens, Terminator Salvation happens, and so on and so on and so forth until you jump enough times, timeline wise, that you end up at Terminator Genisys. Then you jump some more timeline wise, and you end up at Terminator Dark Fate. And that's cool as fuck because for the most part we've never gotten a solid explanation as to how time travel exists in the Terminator universe. Like no one's actually ever sat down and had like a 5 to 10 minute conversation as to the way in which things essentially work, which is a fantastic idea, hilariously enough, that is explored in both Terminator Genisys and Terminator Dark Fate, with the idea of both Carl and the old man. So, old man Terminator from Terminator Genisys, his timeline no longer exists anymore. And we know that because John Connor, when he gets turned into a Terminator, he scans him and says that, what timeline are you from and who sent you back into the past? Because even he was confused because Carl basically shouldn't have existed because his timeline, the one in which he is from, doesn't exist anymore. There's no data on to exactly where he came from or who would have sent him all the way into the past to essentially save Sarah Connor. But there's something a lot more interesting along those lines for that character, because let's say this was the original Terminator timeline. The original Terminator timeline has Kyle Reese being sent here, which Vergences and creates the T2 timeline. For Genisys to exist, the Skynet had to send somebody even further back into the past of this timeline to create a new timeline, which completely disregards the. It's one of the reasons why every event in Terminator still happened. Nothing really changed. So for a lot of people, me included, if you want to say that the deleted scenes from Terminator 2, where John Connor goes off and becomes a politician, that you could say that. You could say that that timeline still exists. That timeline never changed in any way, shape, or form. And T2 is a definitive end. And you could argue that on this same timeline, at a different point, something else happened, which led to the T3 timeline. So you can see how the map is completely different from the first one that I did to this one that I did. Everything that's ever happened has happened. What we're basically seeing are the Vergences, where these Terminators essentially end up in the past and end up creating a completely new branch reality from what should have essentially happened. So if you want, like I said, Terminator 2's John Connor to go off and be a senator and run for president, that can absolutely fucking happen. Due to the way in which time travel essentially works in the universe. But one of the things that I really, really have come to enjoy because of Terminator Zero is the idea of chaos Terminators. And what I mean by that is Sarah Connor Chronicles. Gotta say that fast, did a really, really fantastic job of showing the fact that if this was the timeline and Skynet was up here in the future, that Skynet basically bombarded the timeline with Terminators. He did just everywhere for no apparent reason, just assassinating multiple random people on the timeline, and sometimes sending multiple Terminators into the past that have like completely contradicting orders. But because of that, every single time a Terminator showed up, the effect that that had is the creation of multiple timelines where, let's say, the main timeline that is being bombarded by all these Terminators is the timeline that Sarah Connor Chronicles exists in. There are wild spin-off timelines where these Terminators succeeded at their job. Maybe this Terminator was supposed to kill John. Maybe this Terminator was supposed to kill Sarah. Maybe this Terminator was supposed to kill some type of political target. A military installation was supposed to be wiped out. This Terminator had somebody else he needed to eliminate, and the timeline continues trucking because John and his family are essentially thwarting these Terminators' plans. But just like in Terminator Dark Fate, where once again Skynet's up here and the timeline's down here, for Sarah Connor, this timeline was a vergence off of the T2 timeline, where her and John basically succeeded in their mission, which is another reason as to why I can, in all honesty, say that Terminator 3 might as well just be its own timeline, because Terminator 2 and Terminator Dark Fate completely contradict what happened in that film. It also contradicts what happens in Salvation as well. But for T2, they go off on vacation. And instead of being able to be on vacation and have like an absolute fucking ball, they get ganked by another T-800, Carl, which ends up creating a completely new timeline that Terminator Dark Fate exists in, because John Connor was essentially killed and Skynet was essentially decommissioned, or its name was even changed. So an argument could be made that, let's say Skynet was supposed to be created, and the Skynet that was supposed to be have made was supposed to be the T3 version of Skynet, but because a random T800 got sent way back into the past and was able to succeed its mission in killing John Connor on a fucking beach in Mexico, the version of Skynet from T3 never happened, and Skynet gets upgraded into Legion instead. And I love goofy shit like this. I love how absolutely fucking insane the Terminator timeline, just time travel situation absolutely fucking is. It is great. It is fantastic in every way, shape, or form. Like the idea that at one point in time, Skynet was just in the future, and it was like, man, I can't fucking kill this one guy. Like, I sent the Terminator here to try and kill him when he wasn't even born yet. I failed. I sent the Terminator here to kill him as a kid. I failed. I sent the Terminator here to kill him when he was an adult. I failed. You know what? Fuck it. We ball. I'm sending Terminators everywhere across the entire timeline. Just every single T800 currently in this factory is getting sent to every single point in the timeline to kill John Connor, because I am 100% sick of his bullshit. Is absolutely hilarious. And then you can understand why the argument is made in Terminator Genisys that there are deleted timelines that just, for the most part, don't exist anymore in any way, shape, or form. But let me know what you think about the Terminator timeline situation, the way in which Terminator Zero basically explained the timeline in, well, it basically explained the way in which time travel works in the Terminator universe, where when you leave your timeline, it's not gone. You're basically leaving your timeline to go to another timeline to prevent like the same type of destruction. But this idea of attempting to change your own future and your own uh 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 present by sending something into the past is absolutely flawed and causes nothing but untold chaos. Let me know what you think. Comment down below. I'll catch you next one. Peace.